In less than 2 weeks, the Middle East has transformed from a familiar series of hotspots into a crisis that could shake the entire world. Iran has been struck directly at the heart of its power. Beirut is once again engulfed in flames. The Strait of Hormuz, a vital energy shipping lane, is so congested that the International Energy Agency has had to release its largest oil reserves in history. The question now is no longer will there be conflict, but where will this war end? Over the next 20 minutes, we'll peel back the layers of the latest Middle East conflict, from the opening strike in late February, Iran's response, Hezbollah's involvement, to the ripple effects on Lebanon, Gaza, shipping, oil prices, and the regional balance of power. And by the end of the video, you'll understand why the scariest thing right now isn't just the number of missiles in flight, but the fact that everyone believes they can't stop yet. If you only looked at individual news reports, you might think these were still separate fronts. Gaza is Gaza, Lebanon is Lebanon, Iran is Iran. But in reality, the Middle East is now operating as an interconnected network of wars. Gaza is not truly at peace after the October 2025 ceasefire agreement. Lebanon is experiencing a new wave of airstrikes and displacement. Iran has just entered a phase of direct confrontation with the U.S. and Israel. And Hormuz, the throat of global energy, is being drawn into that vortex. In other words, this is no longer a war with a single center, but a multi-front crisis.
But
the turning point was February 28th.
Crossed a new line.
According to widely cited sources, the U.S. and Israeli air campaign against Iran opened a new phase, and the biggest shock was the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei in that strike. From that moment on, the simmering confrontation between Israel and Iran was no longer a shadowy battle fought through proxy forces. It became an open confrontation with enormous political, military, and symbolic consequences for the entire region. Once Iran's highest symbol of power was taken down, the entire geopolitical landscape changed. The danger lies not only in Iran's retaliation, but in how Iran retaliates. As missiles, drones, and threats targeting regional infrastructure, transportation, and energy lines mount, the message is clear. Tehran does not want this to be a limited exchange of blows. Iran wants to demonstrate that, if cornered, it can make the cost of war extend beyond Iranian territory, reaching U.S. allies, Gulf states, and global markets. When one side shifts from defense to regional sanctions, the psychological threshold for war is broken, and at that very moment, Lebanon erupted. Hezbollah launched new attacks on Israel, and Israel responded with heavy airstrikes on southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut. According to today's updated sources, the intensity of fighting on this front has increased significantly, to the point that Israel has had to adjust its troop deployment, shifting its attention increasingly northward. The Lebanese front is therefore no longer just a satellite of the war. It is becoming a battlefield large enough to force Israel to redistribute its military priorities between Gaza and the border with Hezbollah. One of the most significant signals is Israel being pulled away from its single-pronged approach. When forces in Gaza have to cede some priority to the Lebanese front, it means strategic pressure is increasing. A nation can withstand a protracted war if it knows where it's fighting. But when hotspots are interconnected from Gaza to Lebanon, then around Iran and Hormuz, the question is no longer how hard to fight, but how many fronts can be maintained simultaneously. And that's always the kind of problem that causes wars to escalate faster than expected. A very easy mistake to make right now is thinking that Gaza is done. That's not the case. AP reports that since the October 2025 ceasefire agreement, the most intense fighting has subsided, but sporadic fire continues, and humanitarian agencies warn that famine and social crises persist. OCHA also noted that casualties continued to appear in late February and early March. This means that when war with Iran broke out, Gaza didn't disappear. It was simply pushed out of the media spotlight. And this shift in attention could create a dangerous vacuum for new developments. To understand Lebanon, one must understand Hezbollah's position within the regional power axis. The Associated Press once described Hezbollah as Iran's most powerful armed proxy force in the Middle East. After years of development, this organization is not just an armed group in Lebanon. but also part of Tehran's deterrence architecture. Therefore, following the blow that ousted Iran's top leadership, the political and symbolic pressure on Hezbollah is immense. If they remain neutral, the entire credibility of the axis of resistance will be called into question. If they become more deeply involved, Lebanon will pay the price first. That is the strategic trap Beirut is currently caught in. One of the most haunting images of the past few days has been that of Beirut residents fleeing after large-scale evacuations. AP reported that Israel issued mass evacuation warnings for the southern suburbs of Beirut before launching airstrikes. UNHCR added that in just over a week since March 2nd, evacuation warnings and airstrikes forced families across Lebanon to leave in very short periods. The terrifying aspect is not just the bombs and bullets, but the feeling that people no longer know where the safe rear lines are. When a capital city begins to live in the logic of evacuation, the war has crossed a new threshold. A particularly noteworthy detail is that UN peacekeeping forces in Lebanon have confirmed ground fighting near the southern border. Amid Israeli expansion and Hezbollah's announcement of retaliatory strikes, this is a point to watch very closely. Because between artillery, missiles, and drones, there is still one more escalation point: large-scale ground clashes. Regional history shows that once border fighting turns into a ground operation, the rate of casualties, displacement, and infrastructure destruction increases exponentially. And that is what worries Lebanon most today. If you want to gauge the severity of the conflict, look at the displacement. On March 6th, the UNHCR described the situation in the region as a major humanitarian emergency, with nearly 100,000 people displaced inside Lebanon and tens of thousands of Syrian refugees returning to the border. But just days later, the same UNHCR updated that the number of displaced people across Lebanon had risen to nearly 700,000 in a single week. The UNHCR said the evacuation orders had affected more than 100 towns and villages. This was no longer a localized upheaval. It was a national-scale social shock. In major wars, there are events that transcend the battlefield. The death of Ali Khamenei is one such event. It was not merely the loss of an individual, but a rupture in the symbol of supreme power that had shaped Iranian policy for decades. It simultaneously impacted Iranian social sentiment, the legitimacy of the ruling apparatus, the relationship between clerics and the Revolutionary Guard, and how Iran's adversaries assess the timing of their pressure. A regime under attack while simultaneously dealing with a succession crisis is always in a state where it is extremely likely to make tougher decisions rather than softer ones. AP reports that Mojtaba Khamenei has been chosen to succeed his father as supreme leader. But the issue isn't the name, but the message behind that choice. In the context of Iran facing direct attacks, the fact that the power structure has chosen a figure seen as closely connected to hardliners and the Revolutionary Guard suggests that the immediate priority may not be de-escalation, but rather maintaining power continuity and the ability to retaliate. At the same time, the transition during wartime raises concerns about the dynastic nature of a system that has always denied such logic. Instability, therefore, will not decrease, but will only change form. One of the clearest lessons of this escalation is that modern warfare doesn't always have to start with tanks crossing borders. Drones, missiles, phone alerts, a few explosions near an airport, and an entire area can be thrown into chaos in hours. Today, the Wall Street Journal reported that 2 drones crashed near Dubai Airport, injuring 4 people. Earlier attacks targeting shipping and infrastructure in the Gulf also heightened the feeling that any connecting point in the region could be targeted. Cheaper technology is allowing warfare to spread faster, become more unpredictable, and exert far greater psychological pressure. If Beirut is where the smoke and fire are seen, then Hormuz is where the world hears the cracks in the global economy. AP emphasizes that the war with Iran has effectively paralyzed the Strait of Hormuz, a vital shipping lane for oil and gas, and reopening it is an enormous challenge even with a ceasefire. The Financial Times notes that about 20% of global oil and gas passes through this region, which is why just a few attacks on cargo ships or mine layings are enough to send markets reeling. Hormuz is not just geography, it is the lifeblood of faith, The market reaction served as a reminder that war never stops on the military map. AP noted that oil prices surpassed $100 a barrel amid escalating conflict. The Financial Times reported that Brent crude briefly surged to a 4-year high before easing somewhat. Significantly, on March 11th, the IA confirmed that 32 member countries had agreed to release 400 million barrels of emergency oil reserves, the largest release in the agency's history. When the world has to resort to such a large-scale contingency fund, it means that this is no longer considered a hypothetical risk, but a real shock to supply. Modern warfare doesn't just shut down land routes or seaports. It distorts the global air network as well. AP reports that Washington has approved up to $40 million to support charter flights evacuating American citizens from the Middle East due to disruptions caused by the conflict. Euronews reports that a drone strike near a terminal once caused operations at Dubai Airport to temporarily halt. Meanwhile, aviation data cited by Reuters shows many airlines are forced to fly longer and more expensive detours. As the airspace becomes uncertain, war has moved away from the front lines and into the daily lives of tens of thousands of people. The situation is even more dangerous because, at this moment, it's not just the warring parties making decisions. AP reports that France is pushing an international initiative to find a way to reopen the Hormuz when conditions permit. At the same time, the U.S. is preparing plans to protect diplomatic personnel and citizens in the region. Gulf states are increasing security alerts. This shows that every major capital is calculating on 2 levels. First, preventing further damage to regional infrastructure from the war, and second, protecting its own interests if the war doesn't stop. In crises like this, diplomacy doesn't disappear. It simply shifts to damage management mode. Lebanon's tragedy lies in the fact that the country is burdened with a war that its government lacks the power to control. AP reports that the Lebanese parliament has just been forced to extend its term by 2 years due to instability, amidst the displacement of over 500,000 people. At the same time, the Lebanese government is calling on Hezbollah to de-escalate and seeking international support for a ceasefire. But the reality on the ground shows that the Lebanese state lacks the power to restrain this force. Therefore, Lebanon is being pushed into a painful paradox, enduring bombing, displacement, and economic collapse, while still not having complete control over the outcome of war or peace. From all the developments above, 3 possible scenarios can be envisioned. Scenario 1. A regional war expands. If the fighting in Lebanon shifts entirely to the ground, the Hormuz remains paralyzed, and retaliatory measures between Iran and Israel and the U.S. do not subside. Scenario 2. Not a full-scale outbreak, but a protracted hybrid war, meaning missiles, drones, infrastructure attacks, transportation disruptions, and civilian evacuations continue intermittently. Scenario 3. The parties agree to a controlled de-escalation due to the rapidly increasing economic and humanitarian costs. Looking at the current situation, the second scenario seems the most likely, but it is also a very dangerous type of protracted war. There are 4 key indicators to monitor in the coming weeks. First, the intensity of Hezbollah, Israel fighting. Second, the safety of shipping routes through Hormuz. Third, the number of displaced civilians in Lebanon. Fourth, whether Gaza remains quiet or reignites. These signals will reveal whether the crisis is stabilizing or expanding. What we are witnessing in the Middle East is no longer a series of isolated conflicts. It is a stress test for the entire region. Iran is testing its deterrence. Israel is testing its ability to fight on multiple fronts. Lebanon is struggling to survive another war. And the world is testing how much instability the global economy can absorb. When so many pressures collide at once, even a small spark can change everything. And that leads to the biggest question of all. If a full regional war breaks out, who would actually hold the military advantage, Israel or Iran? If you want to understand that balance of power, watch the next video on this channel.